Welcome to Null News Now. My name is Menger, and I will be bringing you the open source and cloud technology news for the week ending in October 3rd. This is the news section that you can count on to bring you up-to-date information on the cloud, Kubernetes, and open source. All right, as always, we're going to start with security. Now, as it was Cloudflare's 10th birthday this week, and in accordance to the supreme laws that govern Cloudflare, Cloudflare has bestowed upon us and the entire internet community more security. They have once again brought us awesomeness into us undeserving netizens. No, this is not a sponsored video. Cloudflare has what they're calling their API Shield, and this is a new service that will be available for free for all Cloudflare account holders, regardless of pricing plan. And there happens to be a free tier. Now, if you run any infrastructure that is facing the web, it is in your best interest to check out this new tool and Cloudflare's suite of tools in general. At a very high level, it works by what we in the biz likes to call a deny all security policy and requires a cryptographic security certificate to talk with the API. At first, this is only going to support HTTP2 and JSON, but they are looking at supporting gRPC in the future, and they're looking for consumer feedback. So if gRPC is something that you would want or you use, then let Cloudflare know so they get on supporting that. All right, so Nvidia is in more hot water. Despite their completely failed launch of their new GPUs, they are at it again with some security flaws. But the big problem is these are known security flaws, and the patch won't even be available until at least tomorrow. So if you have an Nvidia GPU, it needs to be patched as soon as it hits. So be waiting for that patch and hopefully cross your fingers that patch doesn't break your system. With Nvidia's current string of luck, I would not be so sure. That being said, it patches 11 security flaws that prevent everything from unauthorized code execution, theft of sensitive data, escalation of system privileges, and the good old tried and true denial of service attacks. So anyways, make sure you update your NVIDIA GPU drivers as soon as possible. The scheduled release of this patch is October 5th, so be looking for it. All right, that brings us to our open source segment, and there is a new company on this list. Swift System by Apple is now open source. So if you don't know what Swift is a programming language created and cultivated by Apple. It's mostly used in iOS development, but you can use it on other platforms. Now, Swift itself has very idiomatic ways of writing Swift, and it's kind of like C# met Rust. So it's a not garbage collected, but is more like writing C# or not really C#. Anyhow, it's more like writing a garbage collected language than it is something like Rust. And it's pretty cool. It's one of the things that I think they did fairly well. Now, one of the problems with Swift is messing with the system and making system calls or low level concurrency. And that is what Swift System solves for you and allows you to continue writing idiomatic Swift and letting Swift System interface with all of the supported hardware or OSs in the back end. So if you're a Swift user and you use it, this has been open sourced and provided to the community, and it looks like a fantastic tool. Zen now works on the Raspberry Pi 4. If you don't know what Zen is a hypervisor kind of like KVM or Hyper-V or any of your other hypervisors. It is an open source project and it's pretty cool. You should check it out. They now support Raspberry Pi 4. I struggled with this because it looked like they did a lot of work to get it to support Raspberry Pi 4. And I don't know why you would ever hypervisor out your Raspberry Pi 4. So if you would like to run a hypervisor on your Raspberry Pi and you have a reason to do so, leave a comment down below or join the Discord channel and let me know why. And, I'll cover that in the news as why you might want to run a hypervisor. But I'm thinking in the future on Raspberry Pi version 27, when it has a 256 core processor on it, then I'm going to see the point in having a hypervisor. Until then, we'll see. All right. So in Kubernetes, all right, does anybody know what's harder than securing Kubernetes? I'm asking a legitimate question. Not much. Some people have claimed that putting a person on the moon was more difficult than securing Kubernetes. Yet I would argue that we have put a man on the moon. So one of these things have been actually done. The other hasn't. But that being said, it seems like more and more companies and startups are putting out new things around securing your applications and, more importantly, your data in Kubernetes cluster. And that is where Derva has released new data protection services on its data cloud platform to help protect your application data stored in Kubernetes. So if that's something that you guys struggle with or want to look into, it's something to check out. All right, so do you know what else is more difficult than putting someone on the moon? Observability inside Kubernetes. So Kubernetes makes it a particularly challenging thing as a scheduler in containers. And there is yet another observability in Kubernetes startup. So Pixie Labs just raised a 9 million Series A round for its Kubernetes observability platform. So this is big things and big topics. And obviously, the reason I bring these things up is because it helps give us an insight into where projects and companies are going. If they're willing to put $9 million into a Series A round for this observability platform, you can bet that observability in Kubernetes is a big deal. So it's something to keep your eye on. All right, so along that lines, it looks like the Kubernetes consolidation continues on, whether it being VMware buying Heptio, SUSE buying Rancher. Now comes down to Cisco has announced their plans to acquire PortShift, which is a security startup that is focused on security of DevOps environments and Kubernetes. And this kind of shows how seriously Cisco is taking Kubernetes. Although I would say for all intents and purposes, they are slightly late to the game and don't have a ton in their current service offerings. All right, let's move on to the clouds. Azure had a pretty massive AD failure this week that affected a lot of different systems. There was reports of 911 not working, as well as just Teams and other internal Microsoft services and Office 365, people not being able to log in and work. So it appears that all of that has been resolved in a somewhat timely manner, but it did seem to be a large failure that affected most of the nation. So if you had problems logging into email or things like that, now you know why. Other than that, Azure was pretty quiet and didn't have anything else really newsworthy. AWS, on the other hand, released more open source. Now, AWS has been on a tear with their releasing of open source. Most of it is in Rust. But this one is CloudFormation Guard, or AWS CloudFormation Guard, because AWS has to put AWS on the front of all its tools. I'm surprised it's not AWS BottleRocket OS, which, yeah. Anyways, it's a CI tool for infrastructure compliance. And this is also marking its general availability. So if compliance is something you're dealing with, and I assume that this is geared towards AWS, while it might be able to be updated to work with other clouds, if their BottleRocket OS is any showing of their intentions, this will work primarily and easily on AWS. So if you run on AWS and you're looking at compliance and how it affects your company, this is a tool to check out. The other thing that I found kind of interesting was that they released TimeStream, and it is now generally available. What is TimeStream? TimeStream is a time series database for IoT edge and operational applications. Now, they made a claim that it can scale to process trillions of time series events per day, up to 1,000 times faster than a relational database, and at 1/10 of the cost. Now, that sounds really good. But unfortunately, this spec alone isn't really a good one, because they didn't compare it to other time series databases like Prometheus, just a classic one. They compared it to relational databases, which aren't really time series databases. So I'm not sure why they thought that metric was the best one, and we'll have to continue watching this to see really how good it actually is. We're going to move on to GCP. All right, so GCP released Menger on Friday, October 2nd, 2020. Now, while I am emphasizing this date specifically, is because this date made some things stand out as very odd. That being said, Menger in itself is really cool. Menger is a massively large-scale distributed reinforcement learning platform. Menger itself and its name, I'm assuming, comes from the Menger cube, which is a three-dimensional generalization of a one-dimensional Cantor set and two-dimensional, I've never been able to pronounce this dude's name, carpet. You can look it up if you want to. This cube was first described by a person called Carl Menger in like 100 years ago, roughly. 102 years ago? 102 years ago, I think. 3 years ago. 103 years ago. No, 98 years ago. All right, anyways, in his studies, this is the thing that he came up with the Menger cube. You should read about it if you don't. It's not really paramount to this, but it's kind of where the basis comes from. All right, now, reinforcement learning is really interesting and can help in a lot of things, and really is a quite popular way of doing things. But what I found odd about this platform, despite all the awesome things that it seems to provide, because doing reinforcement learning at large scale has been a very complicated task that usually isn't done very efficiently. And that's what it looks to solve. But what I found interesting was that instead of talking about running it on Kubernetes clusters like a sane person would imagine, they talk about Borg cells. Borg. Did they get hurt by the CNCF? Are they giving up on Kubernetes? I guess I was under the false pretense that internally Google had gotten rid of Borg and had been transitioning to Kubernetes. Or maybe not gotten rid of, but been transitioning to Kubernetes. I'm not sure if that is true anymore, as they talk about Borg a lot in this paper. The other thing is, it looks like a 5th grader made their animations. I mean, they're better than this this channel's animations. But for Kubernetes presentation, their animations seemed pretty 2001-ish. And yeah, anyways, despite all of that and the weird oddities around Borgs and not Kubernetes, it is still a really good read. And if you're interested in reinforcement learning, it is a great place to look at. And if you do reinforcement learning at scale, it's definitely something to look at, as you could save a lot of money. All right, so we're going to talk again about Cloudflare. Now, as you all know from earlier, it was their 10-year anniversary this week. And as always, Cloudflare does a fantastic job. Again, not sponsored. They had some really good presentations on the future of the internet. You should go watch those. The links will be in the description below. And is a company that brings a more secure web experience. And now, not only did they champion the support of HTTP 2 and 3, but they have also added support for gRPC. gRPC, if you don't know what that is, if you're not familiar with it, gRPC is an RPC protocol. If you don't know what RPC is kind of like REST. Well, it's like the opposite of REST. Anyways, it operates at the same level of the network stack. So REST has a very much resource definition. You define a resource that you want to get or set or push, whatever. You have your verbs that you do on a resource. Whereas RPC is very much like you call a function and you get a return. And so this is pretty much the difference between those. gRPC is a Google implementation of an RPC framework that uses a binary serialization called protobufers as their backend, and it's built on top of HTTP 2. Really cool thing. Cloudflare now supports it. So if you run in Cloudflare, or if you use gRPC extensively and that had prevented you from Cloudflare, it now supports it. Moving on to technology. Do you have a recommendation system? Does it suck? You know that it does. Recommendation systems can be the backbone of your system, whether it is finding products someone might be interested in or the next video they might like to watch on your platform. Now, which you all know is another null channel video. All right. TensorFlow just released a new module called because everything is TensorFlow, TFRS. TFRS is designed to help you get out of the painful details and let you focus implementing your algorithms for recommendation systems. So it is all designed around recommendation systems. It has a lot of great tools in it for making recommendation systems built around TensorFlow and machine learning. So if that's what you do, if that's what your team, you should check out TFRS. All right, I want to ask you a question. Are tapes the future of storage? Now, we all thought that they were the history of storage, but are they the future of storage? Well, SpectraLogic's Tfinity would like you to think so. Supposedly, they can store 1 exabyte for quite a bit less than AWS. And when I say quite a bit, I mean around $4 million less for 5 years. And actually, if you extend that to 10 years, it's a whole lot less than Amazon. And this comes around because these tapes don't require power and cooling when they're just storing. Now, maybe cloud providers, instead of providing cold storage, they can also provide frozen storage, and that can be tapes. I'm not talking about GitHub's Arctic, although that's probably stored on tapes now that I'm thinking about it. So maybe, just maybe, cloud storage's future is in tapes. All right, Google's CEO kind of made me very upset this week. He went on stage to present and talked about how the future of employees is on site. This was quite disappointing. He was giving a presentation, I'm assuming, that is more made for stock shareholders and the likes, and how they're updating their offices to be more friendly in a pandemic scenario. But he made it clear that the future was on-site, not remote. I find this quite disappointing from Silicon Valley tech companies, where they like to empower you to other companies to use their remote tools, but they don't allow it themselves. They don't really practice what they preach. And I think that remote is really not only fantastic, because I work mostly remote, but I also really think that remote is the future of working. It allows us to work in multicultural teams without wasting resources to travel and see each other in person. Not that in person isn't important. I'll be one of the first people to say, if you are on a remote team, you should see them at least once a year, if not twice in person, whole team. But forcing everybody to live in the same place, as California has found out, isn't necessarily a sustainable choice and really doesn't make the best living conditions. Apple and Google and all of these tech companies have actually led to some of Silicon Valley's problems. And so if they had accepted some remote working, they could have avoided some of these problems. Anyhow, Google, if you want to talk about it, you can reach me. You know where to find me. You have my email, literally. All right. Google Meet is now also limiting its meetings on its free plan to 60 minutes. So in April, I think they had extended that to unlimited during the pandemic. And at this point, I guess Google believes the pandemic is over, because they are now limiting it to 60 minutes. So if you have a problem with this, you should reach out to Google. All right. IonQ. As we all know, I am a huge fan of quantum computing, and IonQ, it is a Maryland-based quantum computing hardware and software company that it has launched not only the next generation of quantum computer, it claimed that it is the most powerful quantum computer built to date based on IBM's quantum volume metric. IBM's quantum volume metric is a way to measure quantum computers and how powerful they are. We don't have a whole lot of empirical data to tell if that's actually a good metric, but it is the one we have today. The company also has announced that this new computer will be made available to customers soon. They didn't really state how soon was. So knowing 2020, you can expect it in 2021. But Elon Musk does not own the company, so there is a chance you still get that computer in 2021. While they made the claim that the quantum age is upon us, I have yet to still believe it. Quantum computing suffers the same fate that fusion suffers. Fusion reactors are hard for one reason. It's hard to do efficiently. And that's the same with quantum computers. Whether it's space or electricity, it's hard to run a quantum computer efficiently. And they're not cheap to build either. So there's a lot of things working against quantum computers and why we don't see quantum computers taking over the world. Now, I actually have a few plans to do some quantum computing videos in the future. So if those are interesting to you, I find them quite interesting and we'll cover them more. But IonQ is stating that they have a new one that is quite powerful. All right, let's move on to project shoutouts. Now, if you have a project, if you're a maintainer of a project, you want to shout out, you join the Discord and let me know what project you'd like to have shout out. So this is a section I reserve for shoutouts of open source projects that either I like or the community has found and they like and are very interesting. I know that I covered a time series database So I thought today I would cover Cortex. If you don't know what Cortex is, and Cortex is a highly scalable, highly available, multi-tenant, long-term storage for Prometheus. So if you don't know what Prometheus is, it's a time series database. It would have been convenient for AWS to remember that there was other time series databases to compare their metrics against, but alas, they forgot and used a relational database. But if you're running Prometheus and you want a highly scalable, highly available, multi-tenant, long-term support, or long-term storage for Prometheus, Cortex is the project you want. It's a CNCF incubating open source project, and you can use it, and it is used by Grafana Cloud, Weave Cloud, and several others to successfully manage and store their long-term time series databases. So if that's you, if you manage a time series database or Prometheus specifically, Cortex is worth checking out. All right, that brings us to the end of the news for October 3rd. I would like to ask you guys to all join the Discord server if you haven't yet, which a lot of you have not. And let me know in the comments below how you're liking these news sections. This news is a new thing that I'm doing. If you're enjoying it, if you're finding it helpful, if you're finding it useful, please let me know. If you have suggestions, also please let me know. And I look forward to making more videos for you guys in the future. Have yourself a fantastic next week.